Dr. Kimarie Bugg is the founder and president of Reaching Our Sisters Everywhere. She is a winner of multiple Lifetime Achievement Awards and has dedicated 40 years of her professional nursing career to decreasing breastfeeding disparities in the African American community. She has also worked with local and national organizations to transform hospital culture, educate medical practitioners and nurses, and more recently, her organization, Rose, is taking on the state of Georgia in ongoing litigation for its disenfranchising and oppressive lactation support provider laws.
I grew up around a lot of breastfeeding families, and it was normal for me to see my aunts and relatives all around me breastfeeding in South Bend, Indiana. And then I went away to school, and that is where I had my children in Texas, in Temple, Texas. And when I had my children, I could not find any support. My family was not there. I could not find any support to help me with breastfeeding. Did not realize, and I did have twins, and didn't find out until a few days before they were born. There were two of them. And so that is what threw me. And then trying to breastfeed them pretty much on my own was just really, really difficult. And I had also just graduated from nursing school, and I reached out, could not find any help at all. And I personally felt that I failed miserably. At that time, being a nurse on the pediatric inpatient area, I decided when I went back to work a few weeks later, probably 8 weeks later or so, that I did not want the mothers that I served to be as miserable as I was. So I started reading about nursing, about breastfeeding, and I became known pretty much every place I went after that. And this was 1979 as the breast nurse. There were barriers everywhere. There were images that depicted, the pretty blonde lady sitting in a beautiful rocking chair with these beautiful flowing nightgowns and flowers, and her hair was all combed. And again, in the Black community, that didn't make it seem like breastfeeding was for us. There were very few images of women of color in the early 80s breastfeeding. Breastfeeding rates were pretty low everywhere, but in the Black community, even much lower. So I moved to Georgia, to Atlanta area, and went to a hospital where I was working in pediatrics again, and breastfeeding rates in the hospital were like 9%. And this was in the early 80s. So we worked with the Surgeon General. C. Everett Koop came through. They gave funds to do a special project on breastfeeding. We chose to do that. And that's when we found out all of the really terrible things that first of all, no one talked to anyone about breastfeeding. They just, asked, are you going to breastfeed or bottle feed? All those little things that were just really barriers. So what I did was set out to actually talk to the women who were having babies, to explain to them why breastfeeding was important. And I had very little problems helping moms to make that choice. It was like, and people would ask me later, Lisa, this was amazing. They would say, well, Kim, how did you convince her? And what I do is I'd walk in and say, hey, you know what? Breastfeeding is really good for you and your baby. You want to breastfeed your baby? And they would look at me and say, okay. And that was it, Lisa, because again, these were women that I looked like, and they just, trust moves at being trusted just moves at a very slow rate, but being trustworthy helps that trust, and they just would take my word that this is something they should do. And so people would just always ask me, how'd you do that? And I didn't want to say, I just asked them if they wanted to do this because that was not being done. No one asked them. So I know that breastfeeding rates were higher at that time too, in the early 80s for white women. And Lisa, I just didn't, I can't tell you. Again, I don't know.
Yeah.
All I know is that the information was coming out about how abysmal the breastfeeding rates were in the Black community. So I was just so focused on that. But there were organizations such as La Leche League. And La Leche League, definitely catered to white women at that time. And therefore, there was some support outside the hospital because no one was getting support in the hospital, or very few people. And so, therefore, that community-based organization, I'm sure, did a tremendous job at supporting the women in their community.
So how did you go around, over, or through this barrier that you were perceiving?
There were so many different sort of caveats. For example, in the hospital where I was, taking the information to the chief neonatologist, one of the first things that he did was say that no longer did I have to convince the physicians and residents why a mother could continue to breastfeed. That if they said she couldn't breastfeed because she's on an antibiotic or whatever, they had to explain to me why she couldn't breastfeed. So overnight, the rates started to go up because no one wanted to take that time and effort and energy to explain that to me. So they did not stop, for ridiculous reasons, women to make them stop breastfeeding. I mean, in those days, if a mother was on amoxicillin, they would tell her she could not breastfeed her baby.
Oh. So where was the turning point when you decided to get organized and start reaching our sisters everywhere?
So I had for many years, as a professional nurse that, worked in the hospital and then at a state level and then at a private pediatric practice, then the School of Medicine. But all during all of that time, I had always continued to help breastfeeding women. There are many women that would come to my house and sit on my sofa at 2:00 in the morning. So it's something I've always done, but not sort of organized. And so after I left the School of Medicine, I was what they call right-sized, but let go with a severance package. I decided that, what, I'm just really want to do this full time. And so we started reaching our sisters everywhere in 2011.
And you've told us before on Kindred about trying to reach back into the hospital administration and some of the barriers there with hanging a poster at a nurse's station, for example, or someplace and saying, oh, well, here's your meeting, and if you don't come to it, that's on you. And then you were expressing how this is not the relational way of the Black community that you were a part of and was actually offensive. And so that was not going to work. A poster, something impersonal, something that didn't relate to, a human contact. How did you start addressing that piece?
What we used to hear so often is, why won't these people come to the breastfeeding support group? You say that they need support, but they won't come. I've put this flyer on the wall. Everybody can see it when they walk by. Our community is truly built on relationships. It's about reaching out to mothers and saying, this is a group that is for you. We want you to come to this group and we can talk about and work through your breastfeeding concerns. And again, that's something that we did that was really very successful, to do some specific reaching out and say that your experiences are important to us and we want to hear about them. And we want you to be in community with other women who have had babies and who are breastfeeding. And so it was just, again, it's about building those relationships.
So in addition to taking on building relationships in the Black community and helping support to grow there for breastfeeding, you turned your attention to equity training, hospital administrators, the United States Breastfeeding Committee, which is kind of the hub for all of the state coalitions. So their reach and ability to bring lots of people along with them is tremendous. Can you tell me about moving into that space? That's a huge barrier, and you went over, around, or through, I'm not sure.
We did. I guess our unique niche at Reaching Our Sisters Everywhere is the fact that I've had the ability in all of these years as a professional nurse, as a mother, as a church member, as a community member, to kind of put all of those communities together. I say nurses are my tribe. I can go in a room with them, and I did for many, many years. And I'm so happy that it's not like that anymore. But I would say, I'd be in a room with 300 nurses and say, how many of you in here have ever seen anybody breastfeed? Very few. How many of you were trained at how to help a breastfeeding mother? No one. So now in a room full of nurses, I can truly say that a majority, 3/4 of them have had some lactation management training and, even had some in their professional training. So things have gotten tremendously better. But, again, the equity piece is what was still missing. As they were learning the skills, the equity part was being left out. Because again, in the literature and the research, for many, many years, it would say that Black women don't breastfeed. We used to hear that so much, see that so much in the research and in the literature. And so, so many people, sort of providers, bought into that they just felt like it wasn't worth their time and energy to talk to Black women about breastfeeding. So as a person who was going around interviewing hospitals and talking to nurses about and doing mock codes for different projects I work on to help hospitals get ready for Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative, so many of the parents, the moms, would tell me that no one, while I was pregnant, no one spoke to me about breastfeeding. No one, not the physician, not the office, no one here at the hospital. So no one, they would say, how are you going to feed your baby, breast or bottle? And that was the extent. So until they were able to get some resources, some information, someone to talk to them about breastfeeding, they just didn't know.
So one of the very grown-up advocacy pieces that Rose has taken on has been to take the state of Georgia to court. Can you tell me about that? That's still going on.
So it's the state of Georgia that we have taken to court because of a law that says basically that only a certain lactation support provider can be called anything that has to do with breastfeeding or lactation, when there are several levels of lactation support providers. And so that was very disenfranchising and really oppressive to the Black community, because again, there are women in the Black community who have been providing this support forever and ever and have been doing a phenomenal job. And so that is why we took this law to court, so that it could hopefully we could not pass it in the form that it is for sure, because it really would disenfranchise a huge majority of not just women of color. South Georgia and North Georgia, the majority of those lactation support providers are in the metro Atlanta area. And then there's nothing north and south. So, low income white women, Hispanic women, all of those women would truly be disenfranchised without the support that they get from the lactation support providers that are in their area.
So this seems to be one of the barriers that the birth community also has faced over the years, which is this desire to press the credentials so far up to the top and in the medical, into a medical model realm, that the indigenous wisdom, the grandmother wisdom that has been passed down with birthing and breastfeeding and women care has been marginalized. And a lot of times this does mean women of color who are carriers of the tradition are then not allowed to practice. So can you just speak for a moment to this piece being potentially lost if it is not consciously protected?
It definitely has to be consciously protected. It's about capitalism. It's all about the dollar. It's not about human value. It's not about the tremendous high rates of Black maternal mortality and morbidity. It's not about Black infant mortality, which is horrendous in these places where these laws are being passed. It's about making money. And so, yeah, it is extremely painful. And, the community is doing everything they can. We are, of course, to hopefully see that it does not pass, and we just won't quit. We will continue to not allow these oppressive practices to be, because again, not every woman needs a clinical lactation support provider. Maybe 25%. And in those cases, there are the mother-to-mother support, there's peer counselor support, there is the certified lactation consultants, there are the international board certified lactation consultants, and then there are Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine physicians. So there is a wide array of lactation support providers. Every level is needed, but not only the top levels are needed to take care of a mother who has a sore nipple. That is just, not necessary. But if her nipple remains sore and where she cannot handle it anymore, then she's going to stop breastfeeding. And so those are the things where, those are the things we want to avoid. And we've been pretty successful at doing that. And if it just so happens that peer-to-peer support or mother support or whichever lactation support provider sees her is able to get $10 or $15 for it, then so be it. And that's where this comes in, is that now there is going to be compensation, and so only they're saying only a certain level of provider can get that compensation.
That is a money. So I'd like to hear, where is Rose now? There's so much that you're doing, and the world, I feel like it's both waking up to the need for and embracing equity, while there are the other end that seems to be digging in their heels. So there's tremendous division, especially where you are right there in Georgia. So you have your work cut out for us. What's Rose? What's the plan? What's the strategy for around and over and under those barriers?
So our summit this year was reckoning with resilience, so that we will understand that it's not easy. We're going to be resilient, but we want everyone to understand that it's difficult and it's necessary that we push through. And so there are some phenomenal projects and programs that are coming down the line. We've been in touch with the American Medical Association that has a huge anti-racism strategy. That anti-racism strategy at the American Medical Association is definitely going to impact breastfeeding and everything else that has to do with, health equity. And so we're totally excited about what it is that they're doing, because that has been a major, major barrier to all of the work that we've done. And also, of course, maternal and infant Black mortality. We've also been working very closely with several of the HBC schools to make sure that they are doing more training on lactation management for their students, for the residents, for the attendings, because there's research that have come out very recently, and we've known this forever, is that, for example, if a Black physician in the neonatal intensive care unit takes care of a Black baby, they have a much higher chance of surviving and thriving. And so all of this research and information is coming out as far as physician care. And also in the nursing realm, I am very proudly being inducted into the American Academy of Nursing. And I am so excited about that, to have the opportunity to work with the breastfeeding task force, the expert panel, and also the equity expert panel. And that hopefully, will lead to working on more policies and papers and all those types of things in nursing. We had the opportunity through the CARES Act to provide about $400,000 to community birth workers throughout the country in all 10 public health regions during COVID, so that they could continue providing telehealth to folks in their community. On our YouTube site are 14 of them who are talking about how they may not have been able to survive, but also about all of the people in the community that they were able to touch, because we were able to provide some hotspots and some tablets and some breast pumps and Dopplers, so that the mothers could have their own Doppler, and the mothers could have their own blood pressure cuff, so that they can know if their blood pressure was too high, so that they could go to the hospital, so that they're not at home, dying because their blood pressure is so high and they're afraid to go in because of COVID. So we were so excited to get those funds, and we worked with 67 different organizations that, we have just so excited about. And so lots of things are happening, from, again, the treetops to the grassroots. And we are so excited about being a part of the work to being done, because for us, it's all about the end user. It's about the mothers and the babies. So it is important to us that they not just survive, but they truly are able to thrive also.
Oh, that is just tremendous. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think the last piece I don't want to skip on is, so much of what you've described is called relational activism. And you and I talked about this before. How do you create stamina for this long-term marathon that you've been on for 40 years and my measly 23 beside yours? But it seems to have been the community piece of the energies of being together. And you were saying this is the oxytocin like you get with breastfeeding that keeps us going. And now we're in this time of COVID. So I'm just wondering if you could speak a little to the activists out there, the advocates who want to keep going, and how we could do that.
It's always important to tap into where your passion is. And for me, that's babies. Every baby is my baby. Every baby is my baby. And, as a nurse in the nursery, and I'll be one of the first to admit, I had to transition through all of that stuff where mothers started, you had the couplet care because, I was a nurse in the nursery where we had 25 babies that we were able to love on and take care of. And then the moms got to have their own babies. And, it was very difficult because we all loved babies. And then we learned that this was definitely the best for the babies. So it's about those children. It's about those babies. We will do anything to make sure again that those babies thrive, that we mark off all of those things that are detrimental to them that we can, so that they can have a bright future. We want to create bright spots for the babies, all of the babies.
So thank you for focusing us on babies before we go. And thank you so much again for everything you're doing. And thank you for the update. And I look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thank you so much for all the work that you do.